you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you here. Thank you for sharing your time with us. I know there's lots of other sessions on at RDA, so we appreciate you coming to Archives and Records Professionals for Research Data Interest Group meeting this afternoon, Europe time. Good morning, good evening, depending upon where you are. So let me just move this slide forward. My name is Laura Malloy. I'm one of 3 co-chairs of this IG, and we're really happy to see you here. I would like to ask Rebecca to first say a quick introduction to herself, and then I'll ask Sarah, and then I'll say a little bit more about what I do.
Thanks, Laura. So my name's Rebecca Grant. I'm currently head of data and software publishing at F1000, which is part of Taylor and Francis, so an academic publisher. My professional background is as an archivist, and last year I finished my PhD in archival science, which was looking at the connections between the work that archivists do and data management. So I'm going to be presenting a couple of slides on my research during this session. So I'm sure Laura will talk more about it, but all 3 of us, so myself, Laura and Sarah, have all completed PhDs in the last few years. And I think that being the case, now that we're all finished, we're really looking to reinvigorate this group. So I'm really looking forward to our first session in a couple of plenaries, I think, and in, I don't know, talking about where this group can go.
Rebecca, Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Ramdeen. I'm a postdoctoral scholar at Columbia University at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. There, I'm a data curator for CSAR, the System for Earth Sample Registration. And so my background is an interesting one in that it's a mix of domain science, undergrad in geology, and then PhD in information library science. And I was really looking at science repositories being similar to archives, and so I'm very excited about this group and the engagement with RDA, because that vehicle for our advocating for our field, I think, is desperately needed. That sounds terrible. Not desperately needed, but like it's a good thing. But yeah, so I'm happy to share this with all of you today and to learn more from our session.
Thanks, Sarah. So for me, I'm Laura Malloy. I'm the Senior Research Lead at CODATA. CODATA is the Committee on Data for the International Science Council here in Paris. And we work on data policy, data skills, and data science for science and society. And I think, seeing as we're such a small group at the moment, perhaps others would like to say who they are briefly as well. Would that be a good idea? Jana, do you want to go ahead, given that you're our first speaker?
I'll go ahead. Please let me know if my microphone acts up again. So I'll be giving you a talk in a little while. I'm Jana Pinnick, and my main job is at the British Geological Survey and its associated National Geoscience Data Centre, where my title is actually grants manager. So I liaise with the academic institutions doing geoscience research. And I'll tell you more later.
Great, thank you, Jana. Lisa, would you like to say hello? You don't have to if you don't want to, but if you'd like to, this would be a good time.
Sure. Hi, I'm Lisa Raymond. I'm from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. We were early adopters of data publication, and we also take care of all the data that comes off our ships and image data from vehicles. So I kind of overlap the worlds of traditional libraries and archives.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Francis, would you like to say hi?
Hi, I won't turn my camera on because I've been having some connection problems today, but I'm Frances Madden. I'm a research associate based at the British Library in London, and at the moment I'm working on a project looking at the role of persistent identifiers in heritage collections, but I have an archival background, which is why I'm in at this group. So yeah, looking forward to hearing the discussion.
Is it Mary? Sorry, my my Zoom interface is covering your name. Would you like to say hello? Is that you'd rather not? That's okay.
So I think we have a Hillary, and
Is it Hillary? Sorry, I can only see RY at the end, so I'm guessing. Is it Hillary? Sorry, Hillary. Hi, Hillary.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Hillary Xue. I am currently in New York City, but I'm a MLIS Library and Information Science graduate student at the University of Maryland. My academic focus has been on archives and digital curation. I am in our school's digital curation fellowship together with the National Agricultural Library on a project on data rescue to kind of understanding what's the challenges and opportunities of recovering and extracting data out of like old scientific data that's sitting in special collections, or when there are lab closures or scientists retiring and the library would accept like a huge dump of material. How can they best curate these data in order for them to be reused? That's why I'm interested in this group. And our team also has a poster number 3 if you're interested. We're currently interviewing practitioners who are doing data curation, recovering data.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hillary. That sounds really interesting. And thanks for saying hi. Amanda, we're just briefly saying hi because it's a relatively small group at the moment. Would you like to say hello?
Sure. Hi, I'm also working on the same project as Hillary. We presented at the Poster Minute Madness yesterday, and so we both have, we're both working on that project, and I'm a first-year PhD student at the University of Maryland iSchool.
Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for saying hi. I think it's already, there's some connections between what people are doing, so that's really encouraging. I just thought it was worth doing that because it's a relatively intimate group at the moment, and we just have a couple of things we want to share with you, and then we're going to have a couple of brief short talks, and we're just going to have a very informal session and try and get people to talk to each other, share ideas, and see what we can do in terms of taking the group forward. So you can see here in the slide, I hope, we currently have 3 co-chairs. We're looking for a 4th. We're preferably somebody who is situated out with Europe or the US, preferably. That's not a hard and fast rule, but we would like to obviously diversify the geographical distribution of our chairs. So if you or somebody that you know would be interested, then we'd be really happy to hear from you and discuss what would be involved. And let's see what we can do to move the group forward together. The IG website is also on this slide, and maybe one of the co-chairs, if it's not already in the chat, if you could paste it in, that'd be really helpful. And you can just go to the Research Data Alliance website and then navigate to groups, interest groups, archives is pretty straightforward, but that link will come up again later. So in terms of today, we have an agenda, which you can see through this link on the slide again. And we have shared notes. If you haven't added your name to the attendance list, please do. It just helps us to get a sense of who's engaging with the group. And you can put in contact details if you want to, you don't have to. And also we have a list open for future ideas. We'd love it if you would think about it, maybe even after this meeting, before the next one, reflect on ideas that are important to you in the archives and records management worlds, and perhaps put these into the link that is on the slide here. Or if you go to the IG website, it's the wiki area has this list here. So if you're logged into the RDA website, you'll be able to edit that freely. And also we have a mailing list, and there's actually quite a large number of people on this mailing list. There's over 100 members of the group. So if you would like to engage, start a conversation, put out some ideas, look for people to work with on things, then please feel free to use that mailing list, as long as it's obviously, you know, pertinent to the interests of the group. But we're always happy for people to start conversations there too. This is our agenda. It's pretty busy. Hopefully we will get through this pretty easily in the 90 minutes, but let's see. We've tried to structure it so there's plenty of time to share ideas and talk. So once I finish in a couple of minutes, we will have a series of 4 very short presentations, just giving out some ideas, some projects that are happening just now. And then there's a short activity with Sarah Ramdeen, who will lead us through rethinking about the IG charter. So basically, the charter is important because it helps us to define what the group is for and what we're trying to do. And so Sarah will take you through that in a really easygoing and relatively unstructured way, just to think together about what the group should be defined as. And then we have time for discussion. And then just at the end, we'll ask people to think about whether they would like to co-chair as well. So from the charter, there'll be a lot more on this later, but just to say the objective of the charter, or the objective of the group defined in the charter, is to explore the ideas where the principles and practices in the information disciplines of archives, records management, and data curation overlap and where they diverge. And the idea being that we're not saying for a minute that archives, records management, and research data curation are all the same things, but they're definitely in dialogue with each other. And we'd like to make sure that people who work in those fields feel at home in RDA, they have a home to come to, they have a community to come to, and also that people in the wider RDA are aware of the long-standing principles and knowledge that already exist in the archives and records management fields, and that knowledge can be transferred between groups. So hopefully this is a useful place for you. Just to give you an idea of some of the previous activities that we had thought about together in previous meetings of the group. So as Rebecca mentioned, there's been a bit of a hiatus, and these activities need to be taken forward. They need to be picked up and taken forward if they are to happen. These are not the only things we'd like to do. These are things that have been suggested in the past and may or may not be of interest to you now. The first is digital preservation guidance. So this would be something that we've talked about a couple of times in the past. And we started discussing the best way to go around drafting guidance or documentation on digital preservation in an accessible way for beginners, for people who are not really familiar with the terminology. As you can see in the slide, similar to the Library IG's 23 Things document, a high-level accessible support or guidance document to help researchers understand and to plan for digital preservation actions so that they know that this is a thing, that it exists, it's important, and it should be thought about, it should be planned for, and perhaps drawing on I think the refreshed NDSA levels of digital preservation could be a direction of travel. And the second one here on the slide is very similar, but for the notion of appraisal. So sometimes I often hear people talk about one of the reservations about making data well managed and stored and available and reusable is, oh, I don't want to keep everything. And of course, if you work in digital preservation and records management, you know that appraisal is massively important. It's kind of a 101 level skill, and it's a very important principle. And it's something that a lot of people are not really aware of. And again, it would be a similar set of guidance that would possibly introduce this notion to researchers and get them, interested and motivated to find out more. And you can see there's a link at the bottom of this slide where this is an early version of the document that we started working on a few years ago. And again, if anybody would like to pick this up, think more about it, take it on board as a focus group or task group, that would be amazing as well. So just some ideas for things that we have previously thought about. If you have questions or you want to put in feedback or just think out loud together, please feel free to use the chat, the shared notes, or actually the mailing list as well that I mentioned earlier. That would be great. So are there any immediate questions before we go into the short talks, or is that clear? Let me have a look at the chat.
So there's a good bit of chat going back and forth.
That's good.
The links. I don't think we had any specific questions. If people do want to type their questions instead of opening their mics, that's totally fine. Feel free to type. But obviously, it's a pretty small group. So if you want to talk, then you can obviously unmute if you prefer to.
Everything's relatively clear. Maybe we can go forward with the talks. And if people think of something they'd like to add in, then they could do that in the chat, and we'll check it out again at the end of the presentations. Does that sound good? Okay, Jana, would you like to be our first speaker in this section?
Thank you. I told you I work at the British Geological Survey, where my main job is managing grants research data. I'm also building a digital preservation program and involved in our information governance framework. So the overlap is very real in my role that you mentioned earlier. I was invited to join you today because I'm also a member of the RDA Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group. And just a few words about this group, which has several task teams, and I've listed a few of them here. There's first three are looking at business case for data stewardship, how to justify that role in the organization. There's a second group looking at the terminology to make sure that different organizations, disciplines, domains talk about the same things, mean same things when they use the same words. And also a group looking at the organizational models who actually have an ongoing survey at the moment. And I've added a link to the slide. So if you are interested in looking at the survey and maybe completing it, please feel free to follow that link and do it. Personally, I'm a member of the training group because I'm very interested in skills and training both researchers and information records data management staff. And I'm in a group looking into the data stewardship landscape, and we are writing a report at the moment. Next slide, please. Thank you. I did start from electronic records management. How did I get into data stewardship? There's several pieces of jigsaw which I put on this slide for you to have a look at. So at the British Geological Survey, my first role was managing electronic records. So I wasn't involved in paper records or archives, just an objective software. And I was producing best practice and training for my colleagues, which took me to work also with researchers using that system. So it was a slippery slope then to research data management. And I was also helping researchers to archive their old data onto tape. These two directions led me into digital preservation, and I actually went to get another degree in information and records management, and with a postgrad diploma in digital preservation. So these original pieces of the jigsaw led to a new career. And I was liaising with records management, information management, data management professionals, both in my organizations and outside. And also the funder, because we are part of the Natural Environment Research Council. We have the data center, which is a funded repository. So there was another strand to learn about quite quickly. And currently we are under the UKRI. So I'm working with the information governance team, or KIM team, at the UKRI, and also liaising with different professional organizations, the IRMS, the DPC, the RDA, and getting to know different strands of the information profession. And finally, back to the researchers and research teams. So during the lockdown, we've done a survey of current research data management practices within our organizations, and that strand from records management, best practice, digital preservation, I've kept that going all the way through throughout these pieces of jigsaw. Next slide, please. So how do records managers, and I do realize that we have quite a few archivists in the audience today, so I'm concentrating on the records management side. We are very well placed to make a contribution in several areas, and even though the RDA report isn't finalized yet, I can already pick out certain areas where records managers have skills and experience to contribute to a data stewardship. So we are part of the organizational context where we have to talk to all the other parts. We are producing and implementing different policies, procedures, workflows in our organizations, having to talk to IT teams, infrastructure technology side. We look into different stakeholders that have an impact on what we do. We have to consider the context in which we work, so regulations, legislation, that sort of thing. So for me, FOI and EIR, for example, and the Public Records Act in the UK. My personal interest revolves around the skills. I used to be a teacher in my first career, and also certification. So I am an IRMS accredited member, and also for the data center, I worked in the Core Trust Seal certification team. So we've got that. So whether it's personal skills or organizational certification, that's something that records managers are well placed to sort out. Also looking at funding and drivers, always having to try to justify why we are important and why we are needed. So that's another skill we have. And something we need to pick up depending on where we work is the subject knowledge of that field. And also horizon scanning. Never stand on your laurels. You have to start looking into the future and planning. Next slide, please. In a perfect world, when we build our professional network, it might look like this, but it's not usually as straightforward and as pretty looking as this, as you will see on the next slide, where I document how I have built networks. So first, starting from the day job, so how these different strands link together. So the data center, where I manage a grants team, a digital preservation team, and a member of the information governance team. So 3 strands already before I even walk out of the house. I've been a member of the IRMS, which is a UK organization with a few overseas members, and I'm the current vice chair of the IRMS. My interest has been trying to bring in more data management and digital preservation items. So in the last year, I've actually initiated a digital preservation interest group because, next bullet point, DPC connection, where under the UKRI umbrella, I've been working with DPC for a few years as a member of their workforce planning and also the management and governance committee. And for example, I've been invited to give a talk about our data center semi-current geoscience records. So again, linking records management to digital preservation. And now I'll have to put that comment aside because I can't see the slide. And I've also given a talk at the IPRES conference about the enhancing data continuity at our data center through delivering research data management training. I've delivered a training course for our PhD students for the last 5 years, and I'm actually giving one next week. So that's another link between my original records and research data. This summer, I have given a virtual talk for the ICA workshop on scientific archives about how we are liaising and engaging with researchers and how we sell our services and find out what the researchers want. And finally, the e-archiving building block, the European project I talked about, preservation of our geospatial digital records using a preferred file format. So there's a disciplinary link there to digital preservation. So those are just some examples of how you can bring these different strands together. It takes quite a bit of time because you have to learn how different, I won't even call them disciplines or domains, but different labeled groups talk, and creating those links and getting to know the people. But I think it's been an exciting journey, and I'm sure that there'll be others here today who already have done similar things or are on the way of adding some strands to their work. That was what I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Jana. Has anybody got any responses to that or any questions?
I added mine in the chat confusingly. It was more so that I remembered what the question was that I wanted to ask. That was really interesting. Thank you so much, Jana. Oh, why did I write Francis? That makes it confusing, sorry. So that was a question for Jana. So I guess what I'm interested in, and I'll talk about my own piece of research on this topic, is like, how do records professionals end up in these roles, or what is it that like, how do we come to be in these kind of data management, data stewardship positions when there's not necessarily a clear pathway, as you showed on your slides? There's no kind of clear path to get us there. So my question was around, like, at your organization, if you hadn't been the one who'd stepped in to work on data management, do you think there was another obvious place that data management fell in the organization, that another team or another individual would have been doing it? Or was it kind of acknowledged in the organization that this is something that is similar enough to records management that you should be doing it?
When I joined the BGS, there was a special data management team who were mainly doing databases and delivering data externally. There was a dedicated records management team, but they were mainly dealing with our paper collections. And we did not have anything to do with digital preservation, and we have only now started proper information governance. So some sections we were doing, others we weren't. So it was just a case of me happening to start the job and then getting interested and then being allowed to get a new master's degree where these strands were discussed. And then getting interested in some of them and finding the right people to talk to, and then ignoring the voices who said you have to concentrate on just one or two things, because I didn't want to drop any of them. And then all of a sudden there is a label, data steward, and I'm still missing that disciplinary experience. I'm not a geoscientist myself, so I still miss that, and I don't think I will want to add anymore.
Great, thank you, Jana. Helen, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. Hi Jana. So
Hello.
I just wanted to add a little bit of background. For those who don't know me, I actually work with Jana at the British Geological Survey. And I just wanted to give a little bit of context to what Jana actually said, because I think Jana firstly has been very modest, but I also think she's been trying to roll a rock up a hill for quite a long time in BGS as well, because as she rightly said, we were very focused on data management, but data preservation was something we paid lip service to. And I think it's fair to say that Jana almost single-handedly has put digital preservation on the roadmap for BGS, because prior to that, people talked about digital preservation, but those people who were talking about it didn't really understand what it means. And so I think it is fair to say that Jana created a program, but also educated a lot of people in BGS about what it really means to undertake digital preservation, rather than a lot of arm waving that happened to be at BGS prior to that.
That's a
You
pretty
had
good
a very
recommendation. Any other reactions before we go on to Rebecca's talk?
Just to respond to Helen, I think that's really interesting, and I'm wondering now about like how often it happens that the kind of drive towards digital preservation comes from the records professional, or like who else would be thinking about it? Librarians. But I guess that happens relatively often, that it's the records professional who's driving that forward.
Yes, it was a case of managing an electronic records management system and thinking of the retention schedules and what happens when the retention comes to an end, what happens to those records, where do they go? And even though we are working with TNA, there was still no pathway for that content.
Anybody else have anything they'd like to ask or respond to? If not, we'll go on to Rebecca. Thanks so much, Jana. That was great. Thanks for opening up all those ideas. It was really quite a lot of things all in one short presentation. So this is a really useful way to get into thinking about this more broadly. Okay, so our next speaker is Rebecca Grant, and she's one of the group co-chairs, and she's going to talk about identifying archival skills for data management.
Laura, so hopefully this is a kind of useful companion presentation to what Jana just spoke about. So I'm looking a little bit more from the archival side. So actually, I'm speaking about my PhD thesis, where I was, I guess I did try to encompass records management too, but I'd worked as an archivist. So I think there's a bit of an archival bias. So yeah, I'm just going to talk about some of the findings from my PhD thesis. And I think it does tie in nicely to what Jana was saying. So I won't go into too much detail about exactly what I did, but basically I was focusing on Ireland and Irish organizations, and I was interested in learning about how policy and practice evolves in relation to research data management, what was happening in Ireland at the time. I'm now based in the UK, but when I started the PhD, I was working at an Irish organization. There didn't seem to be a lot of information available about what was happening in Irish organizations in relation to research data. Because I am an archivist and I was doing my PhD in archival science in the history department, I was interested to learn about whether record keeping professionals, so archivists and records managers, were involved in data management in Ireland at all. I was, so I felt like I was the only person in Ireland, the only archivist who was doing this. So I was really curious to find out, was anybody else? And then finally, in kind of learning more about what was happening in Ireland in terms of practice and who was working in these roles, who was doing this work. I also wanted to think about what kind of areas archivists and records managers could have an impact in. So I started the thesis in 2014, and I guess things were a little bit more fuzzy back then. So it seemed as though librarians were kind of racing ahead. So it seemed like it was still more natural for a librarian to take on a data management role, particularly at a university. So I was curious about, well, if it was archivists or record keepers who were doing this work, what would we do differently? Would we have a particular impact that another type of professional wouldn't? So I started out with a survey of Irish organizations to get a bit of a broader view of just what was happening generally, and also find out were they employing any record keepers. I then moved on to conduct 4 case studies, so looking in more depth at 4 of those organizations, and that included interviewing people working there. And then I also did an autoethnography. So if you're not familiar, it's like an ethnographic study where you're kind of examining your own experiences. So I really wanted to bring some self-reflection in, because I was in this position of being an archivist doing this work and then reporting on archivists doing this work. So I wanted to make sure that that was acknowledged. The data set I have linked on the slide, so that's interview data. So if you wanted to have a look at my data set, that's available. Yeah, you're fine to move on to the next slide, Laura, thank you. So during the course of this research and kind of bringing together all of the chapters of the thesis, by the end of it, I had this set of archival skills that I thought were relevant to data management. So I started out, of course, with a literature review at the very start of the thesis and before I started my research, there were a couple of publications that I thought were particularly relevant to this idea of like, well, what are the skills that record keepers might have? So you might already know them, but Jackie Dooley, The Archival Advantage was one, and then Alex H. Poole's How Has Your Science Data Grown? So in both of these publications, the authors are proposing that there are some skills that record keepers have that might be particularly relevant to managing either digital collections or research data. So had a look at those, also did my surveys, did my interviews, and then the personal reflection, which was the autoethnography. And then coming out of that, I had not just a list of kind of skills that I thought might be relevant, but also some data about, well, what's actually happening? Like, are archivists actually doing any of these things? And if so, does it make any difference? Are they doing things any differently to how anybody else would manage data in particular ways? So if you go to the next slide, Laura. So I just pulled out some of the skills that came up in my own research. This is just a few, and like I don't think any of them would be surprising. And I think Jana also touched on a couple of them. So things that archivists or record keepers do that are relevant to data management. So being familiar with concepts of intellectual property rights and ownership, how you transfer those when collections are deposited, the idea of persistently identifying a collection or a piece of data, skills in creating good metadata, writing comprehensive descriptions of collections. Something else I think Jana mentioned, which is appraisal. Or maybe it was Laura, but thinking about like what needs to be kept for the long term, also digital preservation or just preservation and arrangement. So these were some of the things that were not just suggested in the literature, but also I found record keepers were actually doing in Irish organizations in terms of data management. So some of the other findings that came out of that were around the challenges. So if you're a record keeper who's working in a data curation context, what is it that makes it difficult for you? Again, probably not very surprising, but one thing that came up more than once was the use of technical terminology. So for example, archivists might not necessarily be familiar with a term like metadata. I wasn't when I started my data management job, but they would know what description means. So in all kinds of scenarios, technical terms are used that actually have parallels in the way record keepers speak about their work. But there's no kind of mapping of these terms. How would you know what somebody meant when you're talking to your IT department about a data repository if you're an archivist? Secondly, and I think this is something that's come up just through our work with the RDA group, is a lack of recognition of record keeping expertise. So if you're an archivist or a records manager at your organization, it's not necessarily the case that your potential applicable skills in relation to data stewardship are acknowledged. People might not know that you would have skills that would also be useful for data management. And finally, a lack of focused training or even resources for record keepers. So again, something Laura mentioned at the start, the library group at RDA have been really good about pulling together resources. They have their 23 things document, which I think is one of the most popular RDA outputs. But if you go looking for specific guidance for archivists and records managers who want to move into data management, there's very little. And I think it's very hard if you don't see yourself in those resources or in available training, then you feel like it's not for you. And that's one of the other things that I got from speaking to people and doing my thesis. So I think that was my last slide, but yeah, I thought there were some, I guess, similarities in what myself and Jana were saying. And maybe if we have time, we could talk about some of those challenges in this meeting, because I'd be interested to hear other people's experiences as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. That's brilliant. And it ties together a lot of the things that we've covered already, actually. So yeah, thank you. Jana's got a question. Oh, is that that's just applause? Jana's just applauding you.
There is a comment though, so I really like your set of skills there, because I recognize each one of those from my RDM training course as topics that I'm talking about. So definitely agree with you there.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to press on. Just keeping an eye on the clock here. We were going to have Libby Bishop from GASIS with us, but unfortunately she can't come today. So she's asked me to just show you this slide and say a couple of brief words about this exciting new resource that CESDA will be launching very soon. CESDA is the Consortium of European Social Science Data Archives, for those of you not working in the European context. And the CESDA Data Archiving Guide is a new resource, as you can see from this slide, which is being developed right now and is designed to provide employees of data archives and repositories with an understanding of the work performed by data archives. And the information in this new data archiving guide, or DAG, was collected by experts from CESDA Social Science Data Archives, reflecting the procedures and policies at their local archives. Whilst the context of these archives varies in size and the underlying technical architecture or in the specific services provided to researchers, the data archiving guide focuses on common ground, which I think is a nice way to go forward, and is a useful tool for professionals new to data archiving, or for those who are knowledgeable in one domain but now seek to broaden their expertise. So Libby was keen to tell us about this because they're having a soft launch event on Tuesday, the 16th of November. And this is because the Data Archiving Guide website is still under construction, but there is now enough content in place that they feel that they're in a good position to seek feedback from us and from the community. The timing's right to consult, in their view, and they have 3 goals for this launch event, which is why they'd like us to all attend. Firstly, to present the content of the 4 current modules that they already have in place. So that's FAQs, policies, pre-ingest and ingest. Secondly, to collect feedback from participants on these current modules. So are they fit for purpose? Do they look good to you? And thirdly, to present the current plan for additional modules and to get advice from the community if these topics are appropriate or if there are others that we should consider. So the link for registration, the event is free. It's on from 9 to 1 Cologne time, so that's 8 AM till 12 noon UTC on Tuesday, 16th of November. It's a free event, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to Helen on the email address on the slide. And we will obviously make this recording available, so if you don't catch these details right now, screenshot them, or we can make sure that you know that the recording is up if you want to check them out later. So are there any immediate questions about that? Yes, good point, Rebecca, thank you. This has been sent around already on the archives IG mailing list, and we can repost it if that's helpful. So that's a very quick topic from Libby. And the final speaker in our short presentation section is Francesco Gelati from Hamburg University Archives. Now, he is another speaker who was unable to attend but really wanted to take part. And he's given us a video to play, which I'll put on in a second. Francesco would like questions or reactions to be directed to the IG mailing list so that he can see them and he can respond to them. So once again, if you'd like to check out the mailing list, then he'd really appreciate any feedback or questions that you have to be posted there. Of course, you can also put them in the chat, or you can put them in the shared notes as you wish. Okay, so I'm going to pop on the video. I understand that the audio is quite quiet, so you may want to turn up your headphones volume once he starts to speak.
Hello, thanks for your attention and thanks for inviting me. It's Francesco Gelati from the Hamburg University, more specifically the Hamburg University Archives, and I would like to give now a short speech about standard compliance versus data quality, and I would like to use as an example the OA's standards for digital preservation. The OAS standard, Open Archival Information System, also known as ISO standard 14721, is a very strong and detailed standard for digital preservation. It is a context-neutral, technology-independent reference model for the long-term preservation of and archiving of digital objects. Together with other metadata standards like METS and PREMIS, offers a very good framework for digital preservation. But this is, of course, not enough because even though the OS standard offers several instructions about how to shape the data packages, including vocabularies and references. The purpose of the OS standard is not to describe the very digital object. So digital objects have to comply with discipline, context, specific standards or requirements. And of course, we are working hard today in several discipline-based working groups in order to develop strong, reusable, fair guidelines for digital objects. But there is still some gray zone, especially for contexts and disciplines where there is fewer attention for digital preservation. I'm thinking, for instance, to the German data model for real estate management, Bauwesen in German. And it's an XML-based standard, which has, of course, several advantages and plus points as XML standard. But the way that vocabularies and terminology is not that digital preservation is not that strong enough from a digital preservation perspective. From this specific example, I also wonder where we can find a good balance between framework standard compliance, for instance, within the OS system, and data sets, data quality, or metadata quality and compliance for the very digital objects. It is for sure true that there are many digital preservation specialists and officers that work hard in order to validate formats, in order to convert formats to digital preservation friendly or friendlier formats. But how much do we have to work hard in order to improve the quality of every singular digital object, and how much efforts do we need in order to have preservation-oriented framework. I would love to discuss these topics further with you, and I'm looking forward to it. So thanks once again for your attention, and keep in touch. Bye.
Thanks again to Francesco for making that contribution to our group. Really appreciate him taking time to do that. Can you see the slides again? Just checking.
Yes.
Great, thank you. So, any questions? Rebecca's put a question in the chat. Do you think the researchers have standards fatigue? We try to communicate about FAIR plus disciplinary standards plus preservation standards in our author guidelines. Anybody got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, just in a kind of reference to what Francesco was talking about, like I can't even imagine trying to communicate. I mean, I'm not sure that he was specifically thinking of researchers or individuals, but just thinking about how many more standards we can layer on, like even when they're necessary. Like, I don't know how much more research. Like, I think I've found that because I mean we're a publication platform, like you're a bit of a gatekeeper because researchers come to you with something and then you can either tell them it's okay or it's not. And instead of kind of wanting to know what the guidelines are, they just want you to tell them, is this okay? Or if not, what is okay? And that kind of struck me listening to what Francesco was saying. Not that that means we shouldn't have appropriate standards.
It's happening at that moment because they're wanting to get something into a particular environment, I guess, rather than something that they've been thinking about as part of doing good science earlier in the life cycle of their work. Yeah. Anybody else? Do you relate to any of the points that people have raised, any of the speakers? Or do you take issue with anything that somebody said so far? She said, looking for a debate. Okay, we'll let you think a little bit more about everything that's been brought up. I realized that there was 4 pretty quick talks there with lots of ideas, so it's natural to want a little bit of time to digest everything. But please put into the chat, or Francis has put a question, thank you. How hard have those of you who have done research find it to practice what you preach about standards and beyond? Excellent question, Francis. Do you want to expand at all?
Just to say that having gone from a sort of advocacy role, trying to, you know, communicate about research data management and its benefits, to then, and, you know, apply it in sort of management of repositories and things, to then going into a research role where you're trying to do it, so to speak, I did find it surprising. I was surprised at how hard I found it, particularly, you know, trying to be like work openly beyond just sharing things retrospectively, I suppose. So I was just wondering, particularly because you mentioned at the start that quite a lot of you have just finished PhDs in recent years, whether you had any reflections on that.
I have one that's not massively helpful to most people, but I definitely know what you mean. So the study I did was qualitative and practitioner-centered, and this group of people that I spoke to all want their name in the data. They all want to be identified. And it's partly because they're artists, so they're professional artists, and they want their name attached to everything that they do. And nobody can advise me on making sure that they are identified, because all the guidance is about making sure people are not identified. And so I feel like, as somebody who works on policy and advocacy and training for data and for ethical research, and who teaches qualitative methods as well, I'm stumped, because I want to respect their wishes. This is something that they've asked for. So I'm still unable to publish that data set because I can't work out how to do this without everybody being cross about it in one direction or another. So it's an interesting problem. So that's what came up for me.
I think I had the opposite problem. Like, so I also did qualitative research. I did a series of interviews. It was obvious from the conversations I was having that I wouldn't be able to anonymize. Like, people are talking about their work at like a particular organization in Ireland, and there's only one of that type of organization. Like, it's clear who the person was. So yeah, I decided, actually, I'm not going to even try to share this data set. I was like, I didn't ask for permission to share it. Like, I'll destroy it. I'll wait a bit longer, but then I will destroy it. So, like, your question was like, do you practice what you preach? So no. I mean, I practice kind of respecting participant privacy and not sharing data that I shouldn't share, but it is really hard. And every time I publish in a journal, like, I realize how difficult it is to interpret that kind of guidance. Like, what exactly are you being asked to do, and how do you know you've done it correctly? Yeah, so I don't know, Sarah, do you have any horror stories?
Well, not horror stories, but I was just going to say, so we go through these trainings to get the PhD, and you learn the best and most optimal way of doing things. And then when you get into the job, then it's like, well, how do you fit that into reality in some ways? And also I find, so I work in the domain sciences. So our work is very prescribed by the grants that we get to fund the projects. And so I could bring in these great ideas of, here's how we could be doing this better, but it's constrained by, well, this is what we can put into the grant proposal. This is what we can get past the reviewers who are domain scientists and may not understand the value of these things yet. So it's been an interesting balance, but I will say that in the, like, I'm trying to figure how many years I've been doing this, like 10, 15 years I've been working with the domain scientists. It's a very pleasant surprise to see now they're bringing up topics and they're using terminology. And I think it's becoming easier to bring in these good practices than it was before.
Interesting. Anyone else got a similar experience to share? Helen, go ahead.
Yeah, this might be a little bit controversial, but I was in a session earlier this week, and the discussion got on to whether it's, I have to be careful, this doesn't sound ageist, but I guess it's okay because I'm probably the oldest person on this call anyway, whether some of this change in approach and willingness to adopt good practices is coming with the next generation of researchers. Is this something that's, you know, acknowledged? Because in other spaces, the meeting I was in earlier this week was in the context of good practices in open science. And one of the speakers was quite blunt and said, you know, as senior researchers are retiring, wider adoption of good practices in open science is becoming easier because there's more awareness, there's more knowledge, and there's more willingness from the next generation of researchers. And I just wonder whether that's also the case in the context of research data management and records management.
Point. Anyone like to respond to that?
Just to say, like, I think from having from having been at the Records Associate or Archives and Records Association conferences in the past few years in the UK, definitely the profession is changing. Like, I've been really impressed and excited by the conversations happening. So yeah, I mean, I've heard the same thing, like people say, like, we need to wait for the older researchers to retire. I mean, some of them are great advocates for open science, but like, if you're training the new generation and you train them to be open, then you can imagine that would certainly have an impact. I think Jana had her hand up.
Yeah, just a quick comment to follow on what Helen was saying there. When I started at BGS, there were certainly the previous generation of researchers with cupboards and cupboards full of old science data, which was definitely not reusable because it was written notes in notebooks and you couldn't read their handwriting. So now the PhD students that come through the door and take our RDM course, and Helen is teaching them the open science module. So they are completely with it, with the born digital environment and sharing things, making them reusable. And ensuring that they will be accessible into the future, so they understand the thinking. So I think it's definitely true that there is a shift, and it's happening quite fast at the moment.
You're optimistic that the role of archivists and records managers will continue to be understood, or maybe even understood better than it is just now?
I wanted to add to that too, that I think the change in views on credit, this has come up in a few other sessions too, on who gets credit for what and how it's expanding to include more of these different roles, where maybe now the archivists or the curators or the record managers who do something that helps promote and preserve the data are also getting credit, and there's now seen more value in some of those positions as well.
Certainly hope so. Sarah, I have my eye on the time, and we have just under half an hour left. Would you like to go ahead with the exercise, and then we can pick up chat if we have time at the end?
Yeah, of course. So if you want to go to the next slide, for this section, clearly ignore the time constraints, but we're going to be reviewing the current charter for the interest group. So to give you a bit of background, the charter was written in 2015, and I was rereading it again this morning to just prepare for this session, and I think it's a very well-written charter. It's like a relief in some ways, but I understand that it is a bit dated and it might not reflect the current views of the membership. So we wanted to take the time and the opportunity, as we were relaunching the interest group after a few years of being dormant, to say, well, let's take a look at the charter and see how we can get community input and maybe make some changes to it. And so for this bit of a breakout session, I guess we can handle a few different ways. There's the first link, which I believe Rebecca put them both in the chat, is to the Google Doc, and we can look at it together there and share comments on it. Or I've also created a Miro board, which is kind of like a digital whiteboard where we could discuss things and put Post-it notes up together. And so it's one of those things where, since we're a small enough group, we can see where people feel most comfortable working. But actually, I'll go ahead and share my screen. If you want to stop, Laura. And I will put up the Miro board just to show a bit. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yes. It's pretty small, but and the type is pretty small.
All right, so actually, before I zoom in, let me step back and say that there are 4 key areas that need to be updated. There's the outcomes, and this is more of just a check-in on how we feel of what the purpose of the group should be. There's the engagement area, which is just a list of groups that we should have some connection to. And I feel like, especially as this charter has been written 6 years ago, that there may be new groups. And like I've added the professionalizing data stewardship interest group as one of them. So different groups that might be internal to RDA or external that we'll want to connect with. The other areas, activities that this group wants to work on. Laura started at the beginning of the session with providing a brief overview of some of the activities that had been established earlier on in the group's existence, but clearly some of those things might have changed, and also we realized they were big tasks as well, so we probably want to reconsider what activities this group wants to work on. And also, to be honest, interest groups are not necessarily designed to have outcomes. You can spin off working groups, but I think we were a bit ambitious with our activities and actually trying to accomplish some things that maybe should have been best left as working groups, and perhaps giving the space for the interest group to do what we've been doing today, having these really wonderful discussions and presentations from other communities and groups about how we could engage together and share. So definitely revisiting sort of the purpose of the activities that we would want. And then finally, the existing contributions in the literature. This is just like a lit review, basically, of some major things and resources that people interested in the community might want to look at. And it's got a very strong list, and there just might be a quick check on, well, has anything come out in the past 6 years that we want to add to this list? So let me just check real quick to see if anyone made any requests for the Miro board, because that does require you to log in. But we can do this in either way, where I can either, if people want to just toss out ideas, I can type them in on Post-it notes, or we can use the charter itself and go through it, and people can add comments and suggestions. You can see I've already made a few notes here on it. But since we're small enough, I'd say defer to what the group finds easiest to work with.
I think it might be nice to have more of a discussion and keep notes on the Miro, or and people don't need to be logged into Miro if you can't get onto it. Sarah, would you mind zooming in your screen a bit? Yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
so now we can see it. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, if we can just start with the first section, unless there's another section people are hot to speak about, and just talk about from that, and then move on. And I'll capture any notes in the document itself.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
So I think this first one, which is about, so when we had our first meeting, it was at the Paris plenary, and was it 2014 or 2015? So it was a few years ago now.
Yeah.
But we had a birds of a feather session for archivists and records managers, and it was really well attended. Like, I think we had at least 40 people in the room, which was more than I thought we had. I didn't organize it, but I was excited to see so many people. And it really seemed at the time, September 2015, that there was this opportunity to engage record keepers who might not yet even be aware of RDA in this group. So you could come as a record keeper who maybe wouldn't otherwise have participated in RDA and participated in our group, like attended meetings in between plenaries. Like, it's free to join RDA at the moment anyway. And that we could create this community where anyone who is a record keeper working in data management might find a space where they could contribute and hear from colleagues. So I think this was the purpose of having this in the charter, that we would, encourage more record keepers to participate in RDA. So just to give the context, it's still something I'd love if we could do. I don't know if now there's another space where record keepers are congregating to talk about this, or are we still, I didn't identify anywhere in my research where I was looking for other record keepers doing the same kind of thing as I was.
Those of you here who are not, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I haven't taken part in any of the data steward professionalization interest group work, so I'm not sure how that would relate as well, but go ahead, Laura.
I'm going to say, those of you who are new today, do you feel that this is something that is useful? Do you feel like this is a group that could be something that helps you to feel more interested and to participate more in RDA? Do you feel like this is something that would be useful to your work?
And if not, if you see gaps, something that you would like us to add as well.
I think something that we could think about, and maybe it fits here or in one of the other boxes, is about using that mailing list. So as Laura mentioned, we have, how many people are in the group? Nearly 100. Yeah. So
a big group. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we haven't necessarily exploited it to its full potential, because like, I would love if there was a place where we could just share updates and like what was happening that would be of interest to people who are part of the group. Like, I see every so often I'll see an interesting study come, like something in archival science maybe, where I think, oh, that's interesting to me because like this is my area of research. But I think we could do a better job of sharing that kind of thing. Thank you, Hilary. So that's one thing. And then I guess this kind of came up when we were thinking about organizing this session, like, how else do you communicate? How do you tell people who aren't in the group yet that this is a group that exists? Like, where do you find those record keepers who might be interested to participate but just aren't part of RDA yet?
For me, it's self-evident that there is so much knowledge and expertise in the archive and records manager communities that is really important for the creation and stewardship of data. And I feel like this is something that I want to see recognized, to be honest. I'm an archives and records management fangirl, what can I say? But I think these professions are so important. And I really would like there to have a bigger voice in RDA. Jana, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just tying two strands in again, as the vice chair of the Information and Records Management Society and as a research data manager within the UK RI, or the UK Research and Innovation, there's certainly overlap, and I haven't checked whether some of my colleagues are member of any of these organizations, because I'm sure they would be interested in some of this work.
Wonderful, thank you.
I wonder, is it worth trying to capture like where these people, like what are the groups that this kind of person is involved with? So like I'm on the digital preservation JISC list. I'm on the research data management JISC list. I'm like part of the Archives and Records Association. Where else do you find record keepers who may be interested in data management? How do you communicate with them? Something else that I did as part of my thesis, it was just like a tiny little bit of it, but I did a search across the Archives and Records Association, or the Archives NRA mailing list in the UK. So it's for archivists and records managers in the UK. So I did a little analysis of whether we as a community were talking about research data or not. And it came up way more than I expected. So like there were other record keepers doing this work for sure that we haven't managed to communicate with yet.
What was the name of that group?
So it's a mailing list called Archives-NRA. I did ask them why it's called that. I think it came from a National Archives project. I can't remember. But like it's very popular with archives and records professionals in the UK and Ireland. Like everyone I know is on it.
All the hip kids.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, you could offer an article about records managers in research data space to the IRMS bulletin, because that would reach an audience. If you don't want to go and talk at the IRMS conference directly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I published in ARC magazine, which is like the Archives and Records version. And I don't think I even knew IRMS had one. That's how poorly I'm engaging with our community. So Hillary says digital curation Google group and code for lib.
This is really helpful.
Yeah, like I think what I found challenging, and maybe this group has ideas, is that like you can contact these groups once you know about them, but it's hard to say what our offer is. Like I think we haven't been that, or we could do more to communicate and to think about like what people get from being part of the community and like what we offer other than just the chance to speak to other members of the community via the mailing list or at the plenary sessions.
I think that's a nice activity then to add, is just a brief shareable statement about who we are to these other communities.
And I also think like I don't know how this would work or be formatted, but I feel like there were sometimes interesting updates that could be something like a blog post, or like there's an event coming up, or just something interesting is happening, and it would be nice to have something more tangible to point to than kind of the archives or mailing list to say like this is the kind of thing that we talk about. I don't know, does RDA, I feel like the RDA website doesn't have super great functionality for kind of creating, I mean, there is kind of a blog type thing, isn't there? Or the emails kind of form a...
The website's about to be redone though, I think, so we can't rely too much on how it's currently set up. Well, maybe we can find the functionality we need.
Yeah.
There's a hand from Helen.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that briefly, Laura, that you're correct that the RDA website is about to have quite a major overhaul because it does lack a lot of the functionality that fosters that community activity, like, you know, exactly what you said, Rebecca, things like, you know, creating blogs, but actually some of the navigation is not ideal either. So yeah, it will change quite dramatically before too long.
That's
Exciting times.
So Francis said Digital Preservation Coalition, which is a really good point. Oh, thanks, Amanda. But I think maybe this is something we need to like lean into more, because when we started the group, there was quite a lot of talk about digital preservation, and like that's what people wanted us to talk about. Like we are seen as experts in digital preservation, and like connections with like the DPC, for example. Like we've never really formally done anything around like even connecting in with digital preservation groups. So maybe there's something to be done there. That's vague, but just agreeing with what Francis says about DPC.
And also the IRMS have a digital preservation group. So we have records managers in that space talking digital preservation already. And we are working with ARA and Preservica to deliver a training course early next year virtually.
And for IRMS, like would somebody need to be an individual IRMS member to be able to post to the mailing lists, or?
I'm not sure about the JISC mailing list. I think you could try. Sorry, I need to check with the comms person to have an accurate answer for you.
Don't want to put you on the spot. Francis saying digital preservation has fallen off the radar a bit in the context of research data. Totally agree. I feel like this was like the big topic maybe 4 years ago, and I never hear it talked about anymore.
It was such a big, yeah, something that people really wanted our group to create an overview for, like that we were looking at the 23 things.
Yeah, maybe this is a gap, you know. And like actually so I was at, I think it was the second plenary, it was the one that was in Dublin, and I was in a session where other people, like they weren't archivists, I think they were researchers, were talking about saving everything and whether we should, and had anyone thought about this? And I was like, well, yes, archivists have thought about it. And that's another thing where I feel like I don't see it talked about too much anymore, like that idea of appraisal and selecting what to keep. Thanks, Dora.
Exactly. And this idea that people are assuming that no one's thought about it is frustrating when there's so many with expertise.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking about my statement at the beginning, and I felt silly the way I said it with the desperately needed, but this week I've been in an Astro Materials workshop and listening to these folks who have this like NASA samples from the Apollo missions and things like that, and listening them talk about how, well, we still have handwritten notepads with Polaroids on them and we don't know what to do about them, and the data being trapped in different areas, and it's like, oh, you need archivists so badly. And so I see some of these preservation tasks, but also just needing to emulate their materials and upgrade them every few years in the new file formats and just different things that it's just like, that's why I probably am biased because I've been in this mindset, but some of these things, it's like, I think our group can really have a lot to offer on these concepts to the community.
Yeah, and I think that's how we started. We were like just wanting to say to the other RDA groups, like, there are archivists here. Like if you have questions about appraisal and preservation, there are archivists and this is our job. Helen, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly comment on that, because I think going back to the point that Sarah was making, I think one of the problems that is still recognized in RDA is that we still lack the researchers, those people who are really doing the science are not that well engaged with RDA in general. And I think, you know, Sarah was just talking about the astromaterials workshop, you know, and the fact that you have researchers who don't know what to do with, you know, some of their analog, you know, records and that kind of thing. And I think the problem is those type of people don't engage with RDA. So there needs to be that outreach from RDA. And I think this is I've said this in a number of spaces, including in TAB recently, that we need to be engaging with those, you know, with those groups and those sectors that we currently aren't well connected to.
Yeah, I think since I moved into publishing, like it's become so clear that the kind of push information of like, here's some guidelines, or like, here's the information you need to do this well, doesn't work so well. But then when you come to a gatekeeper like a publisher and you actually need to do something, you suddenly have 100 questions that need to be answered. And in the publishers where I've worked, so I've now worked at 2, like we always needed to have literally a person who would just answer specific questions from researchers like, can I put X file format into Y repository? And like, I feel like at RDA, this group is dying to be that person. Like we want to answer specific questions, and I don't think there's an awareness that we're available to do that. Hilary was just talking about her work in data rescue and recovery, and then I was asking, because there did used to be a data rescue IG at RDA, and I think they've now
It's dormant. Yeah.
Which is a shame. Data conversion. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, I've added that to the list. I'll look more into it to see if it gets approved. We can add that as a connection as well. So that's a good recommendation.
We only have 5 minutes left.
Can I just quickly comment on the data? It's actually called the Data Conservancy Group. There was a case statement drafted, but that group has kind of stagnated a little bit at the moment as well. From the TAB perspective, there was a request for them to revise their charter, but it has, to date, it has not been resubmitted. And some of that activity has moved into CoData, largely because I think some of the key protagonists are very active in CoData.
Yes, there's a CoData task group, which is at the moment up for renewal. So I can't say too much about exactly what's happening with that, because the General Assembly is next week, at which point it will either be renewed or not. So there'll be a clearer picture in a few weeks. It's an awkward time.
So Laura, I was being a little bit circumspect because I was actually asked to do the review.
Ah, okay. I didn't know that. I don't get told anything. Good to know. They're in good hands then. But I mean, yes, so obviously there can be a task group in CoData that interoperates with RDA. I mean, it's not a one or the other necessarily situation. Ideally, we work together. Just to point out, we've got 4 minutes left.
Yeah, I was going to say, should I go back and go to the last slide?
Sarah, yeah. Are you good to do that? Thank you. Would you like me to cover these?
Sure.
I mean, it's all pretty straightforward. As you can see on the slide, basically we've flung a whole pile of stuff at you today. So sorry, not sorry. And if anything is of interest, if you want to think about any of the ideas that have been raised today, any of the activities that we've talked about, if you would like to lead a subgroup, if you would like to join the co-chair team to help us make the group grow and expand and improve, that would be wonderful. And the notes will be left open, so you can add in any thoughts that you have after today. I know these days at RDA are pretty intense, so I know I often think about things after the fact, so please do feel free to add in. And to contact any of us if you would like to talk about being a co-chair, or if you would be interested in running a focus group or task group. Yeah, good point. If you haven't already joined, please do make sure that you join the group. RDA is still free to join at the moment, so please do take advantage of that. And then you will receive the mailing list, which is the all-important discussion mechanism. I think that's one of the things that's come out today. Our email and in some cases Twitter accounts are on the slide just now. Feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions. And thank you to everybody who spoke. And thank you for being here. And thank you, Helen, for coming to observe us. We really appreciate that. And if anybody has any last comments or questions, then this is a good time to raise those.
I just want to say thank you for all the contributions for the charter. This was really excellent. And also you can continue to make comments on that Google Doc, or feel free to, or the Mirror Board, or to email me as well. We'll definitely send around the revised version before we resubmit it back to RDA.
Exactly. Thanks so much, Lucera, for leading on that. That was really helpful.
Yeah, and just to say, if you want any help from the tab side, do let me know. I'm more than happy to advise on the revised charter if that's helpful.
Oh, good, because there was one area I had a question, but I'll email you just about how do we reflect the timeline changes in a group that's already approved. So I'll send you an email about that.
Yeah, no problem, Sarah, not at all.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Okay, well, if there's no more comments or questions, then I think we can wrap up perfectly on time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks to Megan for running the Zoom, and take care.
Bye.